One is going to be a little bit about challenges to the balanced life. So I have some stuff written down, but it might be more effective if you guys like maybe list a bunch of the challenges that you think there are, and then I'll try and kind of combine stuff that I had written with what you guys have identified and then go through that way. Does that sound reasonable? Because you might have different challenges than I, because I was pretty dumb. All right. So everyone, like, don't be like stupidly shy. So just like spill them out because I'm going to type them. So I'm going to put the mic down. So what are things you guys identify as challenges to your balance in life?
Sometimes one aspect is like a major part of your life. And you don't really have time for anything else.
Okay. What else?
It's more of a, like, you have to do it, and not, like, I want to do it. And yawning when you pray.
And what?
And yawning.
Yawning when you pray. Okay.
Can you challenges to having a balanced life?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
In general or with
Consistency.
Can you repeat that?
So, yawning when you pray, and feeling the need that it's a must more than it's a want to pray.
Time management.
do you mean in general or like with Christ?
Any of the four categories that we said that we're trying to balance, what are challenges to balancing those four? So is worship, love, work, play.
Finding what God wants for me.
Okay, what do you mean in terms of that for balance?
So, college decisions, the relationships that I want to get into or not shouldn't be into.
Okay. Gotcha.
Strength.
Stress. Everyone else is balanced perfectly?
Honesty.
Honesty.
Sleep. That's deep.
That was a good one, bro. You get the prize. Okay. Because I'm not using the mic yet. Because I'm writing.
Can you go deeper?
I feel like I'm giving our lesson.
Well, honesty with self, like, are you really praying, or are you really, like, giving time to, putting in the time in whatever you're doing, whether it's studying, whether it's work, whether it is relationship with God, or with friends, social.
That's very good. Okie dokie. Anything else that you guys can think of? You can shout things out randomly later if you want.
Short-term memory studying and actually studying.
Okay. That sounds more of a... I'd probably put that on a different topic, but if we have time, we'll come back to it, because that's more of like how to effectively use the time that I balanced, theoretically. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to be all over the place. So St. Anthony said, without discernment, okay, I can't acquire any virtue. Can you explain why that is? So if I don't have discernment, I can't acquire any virtue. So discernment means the ability to kind of distinguish right and wrong. And in the Desert Fathers and not in the Desert Fathers, a lot of people use that interchangeably with balance. But discernment means to be able to to identify right from wrong, to judge left from right. Why do you think he would say that?
Because if you can't determine that, then you can't see the point or the balance point that you're targeting. You can't have a balance if you don't know what's on the right and what's on the left.
Excellent. Okay. So the biggest challenge to balance is extreme, right? Because if you're not in balance, then you're in extremes. And a lot of people don't recognize what that means on a spiritual level, okay? So on one side we have a virtue, okay? And the opposite side is the vice. And the balance is finding out how do I acquire the virtue. Because an extreme virtue is actually a vice, right? But we'll start off with the vices as a more clear example. So what is the extreme of money? Like, is money intrinsically wrong? No. Right, so if I become money hungry, what is the extreme of that? What would we call that? Starts with a G. Greed. Okay, so the extreme of money, the extreme of love of money is greed. What is the extreme of sex? So I think someone said it. Lust, right? Lust, fornication, adultery, all these manifestations of it, right? What is the extreme of power? That one's not as obvious of one. Sorry? Excellent. I wouldn't have guessed that. Okay, so then what is a virtue? Is fasting from the vice. Okay, so fasting from anger means that I am acquiring what? Patience, right? Fasting from discontentment means that I'm acquiring what? Gratitude, right? If I fast from complaining, I'm learning appreciation, right? Or contentment. Fasting from lust is continence, right? So all of these things are what we're holding in balance with one another. So I need to acquire even that mindset. A lot of us don't even think that way, right? But if I understand what these things are, right, then I'm able to kind of have a goal. I'll be able to figure out what I need to do. Because the devil will take you in both extremes, right? We call them the left-hand wars and the right-hand wars. Left-hand wars are like the obvious thou shalt not sins, right? If I steal, that's a left-hand war, right? If I curse, if I cuss, if I dishonor my parents. These are like almost like active sins, if you will. Versus a right-hand war is a sin of virtue, okay? Which sounds weird, right? But it's when you take a virtue and you apply it the wrong way. That's why I'm talking about this, because of balance, right? Where it'll be like, you know what? I'm just going to pray so much, right? And so that in and of itself doesn't sound wrong, but it's like, okay, now you start neglecting your family. Your mom is ill, right? And she needs help around the house. Like, I'm sorry, Mom, I'm praying, right? Your brother has some monumental issue and you're serving everybody at church, right? And you're not giving the time of day to your brother who might need help within your own home. So you're dressing up a sin with virtue, right? And it was probably for self-gain, it's probably for pride, it's probably for something, might be for escapism in some cases, but it's doing something so-called good in a wrong way. And so my good, instead of being something that builds up people, is actually destructive because I'm doing it wrongly, right? I'm not doing it for the goal of the image and likeness of Christ. I'm not doing it for what it's supposed to be. I'm doing it for something else. So we have to have these things in balance in our spiritual lives, and that's why I talked yesterday about having the guide, right? That's why like when I told you guys yesterday, I told me don't read so much, right? Many people would be like, who would tell somebody not to read, right? Nobody likes to read. Like, he should be happy that he has a kid who likes to read, right? Whereas the discerning person was like, no, this is excess, right? This is now causing him to have these and these and these characteristics. So you need to have a spiritual guide to do it, because one of the obstacles in our worship life is doing something way over the top. I remember in my first year of pharmacy, I had gotten so cocky with how well I had done in school up till then that I thought I was genius, because when I was in engineering, I didn't open a book like more than maximum like the night before, and I was doing really decently. Got into pharmacy effortlessly when it was like, in Canada, it's super hard like to get into any professional health thing. So I was like, I'm brilliant and I love it. And so I went and I started like every single weekday that I could. I was at different churches, meeting different friends, doing spiritual things. Weekends were all service, and I barely studied, and I got owned, like monumentally rocked. So Abuna actually, when I went to talk to him, was like, you're not allowed to serve next year, which for me was like devastating. And he was like, no, you're supposed to be a good role model or image for our kids, right? So what are you teaching them? That it doesn't matter if I bomb school, if I'm so holy and righteous and showing up at church. He's like, that's not the image that I want for them. And he goes, because they look at you as an image. So again, it is even possible to have an imbalance of putting church in applying worship in a wrong way, right? So it's not always just the school part, it's not always just the friend part. You can do church in the wrong way too, right? So with those who are really like church involved, that tends to be their warfare, right? It'll tend to be that you're going to be the kind of person that the devil is going to use the door of service or prayer, or for example, I know I wanted to be a monk, but I know others that have come to want to be monks or nuns, where they'll want to do excess. Why? Because they want the image of a monk or a nun, right? Sometimes it's image mixed with something real. Like, I'm not saying it's always completely feigned, but for those who have an inclination towards the spiritual, the devil, if he can't get them on the left-hand war, right? So if he doesn't get you to be more in the play zone, right, a secular play zone, then he'll try and get you in the extreme worship zone, right? But extreme of anything and lack of anything, both of those extremes are wrong, right? So if you're a churchy person, like, be sure that it's going to be there, which is why it's so important for you to have the spiritual guide to keep you in check, as well as to be a good listener, all right? Listen to your friends, listen to your family, because sometimes they'll be telling you something you don't want to hear, and they're right. Right? Sometimes they'll be like, you know what, like, I'm not against this whole God thing, okay, but you're over the top, right? You're constantly telling people how bad they are, right? You're constantly telling people where they fall short, right? You're like walking left and right, giving everybody and their mom advice, right? So, you know, like, well, I want them to know God. And you'll have these defensive, like, responses, when the reality is you're probably applying it wrong. That's why people are reacting to you, right? If you're doing it in the right way, I'm not saying nobody will react to you when you're doing it the right way, but at the very least, to help protect yourself from this extremism is to be a listener, right? To say, well, why are they saying this? Where are they coming from? Instead of just constantly rejecting their opinion. So my dad would yell at me about the amount of service that I did. And I was just like, yeah, Dad doesn't get it. Dad wasn't religious, right? Dad wasn't somebody who liked service. So to him, he just cares that I'm like number one in the class, but I'm already in professional school, so I'm not competing for anything, so he can chill, right? Whereas he was right, which I obviously didn't want to admit back then. So for the worship balance, you need a good spiritual guide, we said. Your obstacle is most likely going to be either over-righteousness, okay, which is like these right-hand wars, or the opposite, right, extreme, where you're going to be somebody maybe who doesn't do any church, like the ones who think that it's okay to not go to church because you have exams. Or the person who says, I'm not going to serve even though you're being asked to serve, because you might dress it up as something fake holy of like, I'm just not a good example, and I'm just not there yet, and maybe one day. That's dumb. Because if you think one day you're going to be able to say, I'm now worthy enough to serve, right, then something's wrong, right? If you ever have the feeling that you've now accomplished something that makes you good enough to teach, then there's a problem, right? So you can be balanced. If really you're worried about pride, your pride can be kept in check by obedience, right? Because if you have been asked to serve, okay, for whatever reason, and you are able to serve, and then you serve, then if you have thoughts of pride, all you have to say back to the devil is, thanks, like, but no thanks, right? I'm not serving because I'm worthy, right? It has nothing to do with how good I am or how bad I am, right? I was asked to serve, and my father of confession told me to go ahead. And my father of confession is aware of my sins, right? And he's aware of my ego, like both of them, right? So you have a response to both of them. They can be like, no, I'm just doing this because I'm supposed to do it. That will protect you from those. But doing no church is dangerous, right? So this is a little bit what we talked about yesterday, but the extreme, the obstacle, the other extreme of just being apathetic, right? The apathy is a result of not doing church, right? If you don't attend church, right? If you don't pray, if you don't read the Bible, if you don't do any of these things, of course you're going to develop apathy because you've made it not part of your life, right? Like, that's a normal thing, right? Like, even for me, this is hard to say because of how long I've been in California now, right? I don't call home as much as I used to when I first came, right? So thankfully I'm not at a stage because we see each other enough, right? And we make a point of doing that I can still talk to my friends normally, like back home. But imagine if I didn't. Imagine if I wasn't calling them at all, right? Or they weren't calling me, or I wasn't visiting, and vice versa. These people who you could have been super close to, over time, become super awkward, right? Like after a while, it's just kind of like, hey, how's it going? And you don't have much to talk about. Yeah, so how are you? Cool, LOL, right? And then it kind of just trails off and dies, right? At first, you might be able to live off of old memories, right? Like, oh, remember that time when this and this happened? But after like going through old memories like 4 times, like that gets really old, and it's like, yeah, right? Because you're not building new memories, right? There's nothing new. So your obstacle sometimes to why you're not able to have a spiritual life, why you're on the opposite extreme, is that you're not building anything new, right? And so you get stagnant, and when you get stagnant, you don't like it. Because you're like, whatever, it's the same thing. I go, we like say Kirei Laison 100,000 times, we do some Nathanyas. I go home, I say, Our Father, help the poor, help the sick, help mom and dad, give me what I want, peace out, God, right? And so you don't have anything really going on, right? And so it does get stagnant, because you're not talking to anybody, right? You're talking to yourself, right? And so you're not enjoying it, and you're not growing in it, and so then you just don't believe in it. You're like, I did it. I did the prayer thing, right? I read the Bible. God didn't talk to me. All those people who God says are talking to them, well, lucky them. He apparently doesn't like me, so I'm going to do my thing, right? These are things we hear all the time. So you need to find the newness. And this is, again, why you need to have the spiritual guide who balances both extremes, but to explain to you why something's not going how you expected, right? When you pray, how do you pray? Who's teaching you how to pray, right? I never thought about instruction in prayer because I thought prayer was obvious. When I met Abuna Lazarus, right, in Egypt, that you guys might have seen on those videos, and one time he told me, like 2002, or he said something like, I allow myself 1 hour of free thought a day. I was like, you do what? Like I was like, if I have 1 hour of prayer total, like that's amazing. But like he only allowed himself during that time 1 hour of prayer. And again, he has a spiritual guide who just passed away actually. But I don't know what Abuna Lazarus does today, right? But every period had its own thing. So then my reaction to that was, okay, then teach me how to pray. If you're able to pray that long, you're doing something right, because there's no way I could tolerate praying for let's say I'm awake 18 hours of the day, there's no way I could pray for 17. I'd have a heart attack, right? But because somebody is good at it, then you can learn. So if you're having troubles with your prayer, ask to be instructed on how to pray from somebody who is praying successfully. This is what discipleship is for, right? And this is also why our Father confession usually is also our spiritual father, okay? But spiritual fathers and spiritual mothers, and that exists too, okay, don't have to be priests. They do need to be older than you, though, right? You can't take as your spiritual father or mother like your homie from school, right? So I don't know if you guys have heard of Tante Samira from St. Marina's in Irvine. She passed away a year ago. The woman was incredible. She was a saint. She was on the regular with Pope Kyrillos. Like her life was incredible. A very difficult life, however, extremely difficult life. And she prayed like crazy. She prayed nonstop. Abuna Kyrillos Ibrahim shot a really good video during the last year when she was in the hospital. Her eyes were covered, so she didn't know he had walked in, of her praying, right? Because all we wanted to learn from her is how do you pray, right? Because when you see the virtue in somebody, then you can learn, right? If you see that someone's actually applying it, then you can learn and be like, how are you praying? How did you get so prayerful, right? If you don't have any service, go to the person who serves and be like, how is it that you're serving? That will help you with your balance. It'll help you not only in terms of filling in something you're not doing, but they will tell you how they balance it, right? Because they're balancing it too, right? Like Tante Samira, for example, used to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is very monastic, obviously, and she would pray her whole Agbeya at 4 in the morning, okay? And she would do like an hour or two of Bible reading, and then she would sleep. And then when she woke up, all she did was serve people. So she found her balance in doing all of her prayers at once, and then prayer throughout the day internally, right? Not the formal ones. So she had both, right? But that was her balance based on her life, because she's a retired person, right? A person with illness. Everyone's going to have their different situation, right? But she lived. She wasn't always a retired person, right? So when you go to that person, like, well, then what did you do when you did work, right? What did you do at these stages? Because someone will have gone through it. So you need to have somebody keeping you in check from your extremism of I'm so holy, I'm so good, Okay, and from the opposite where like, well, I'm not righteous and I don't care and it didn't work and I don't like it and I don't need it, and insert whatever reason you have to be on the other extreme. All right, because these are the two ways that a person can go. The other thing sometimes that might be an obstacle to your balance is feeling like there's too much, right? So there's a Desert Father story that I really like of a young monk who his elder, his Abba, his guide told him, I want you to go over to this field over there, and I want you to clean it up from all the briars and the thorns and all of that. We want to make this ground tillable again. So he's like, okay. He went and he found like a plot of land that was really big, just completely covered, right, with all these thorns and thistles and briars, and he's like, how on earth am I ever going to get this done? So his solution was just to lie down and sleep. Right? He was just like, I can't do this. Right? Every time he get up to plan it, he just sees the whole thing, and he's like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Right? And so 3 or 4 days later, his Abba comes to visit him because he's like, yeah, go camp out there just to work on it. And he comes back, and the Abba's like, what did you do? He's like, nothing. And he's like, right. Why didn't you do anything? And he's like, I just saw how much there was. And I was like, I can't do that. And he's like, so I just laid down, submitted. And he was like, you fool. He was like, imagine if every day you had just said, I'm going to cover a patch this big. That's it. He was like, you would have been done. Like, this whole thing would have been done. Right? So sometimes the obstacle is seeing that the work to be done is too much, right? If I'm supposed to be holy, then I'm like, I don't know, I'm not Tansamira, I'm not up at 4 a.m. praying the Holy Agbeya and doing all that. That's fine, right? But do you pray at all? Right? Do you pray even a little bit? And when you pray, do you pray from the heart? Right? You can start somewhere. Right? I remember when I used to read the Lives of the Saints a lot. And so when I would read, for example, St. Bishoy tied his hair to the ceiling. Like, I'm not going to tie my hair to the ceiling. Okay? I don't have enough of it. But the equivalent for me, right, to learn from them is, okay, well, do I push myself to pray even when I'm tired? Can I stay up a little bit and actually try and talk to God? Maybe I'm not going to tie my hair to the ceiling, but can I do that? Right, is to learn from what people did. I'll do one of mine and one of yours at a time. Okay, so one aspect of your life takes a major part of your life and you don't have time for anything else, which is related to the time management.
Question, sorry, what if you feel like the fake syndrome, like you're an imposter syndrome, like, I didn't get here based on my merits. I cheated my way through, and like I don't deserve where I'm at.
Right, and a lot of the answers are going to come back to identity. You are, in spite of yourself, a daughter of Christ.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
She's saying, what if you feel like an imposter, like you didn't merit anything, and you were just kind of like put in, right? Am I understanding it correctly? So it would be like, literally, like one of you guys going to your parents and suddenly waking up one day and being like, you know what, I can't be your daughter anymore because I didn't earn being your daughter. I was just born. Yeah. And they will look at you and be like, that's right. There isn't anything you can do to earn being my daughter. You just are. Right? That is simply who you are. That's why we talk about identity. Because if that's who I am, I don't have a choice about it. That's simply who I am existentially, right? God can't decide one day, I don't want to be God anymore. Whether he likes it or not, he's God, right? And whether I like it or not, I'm a son of God. You're a daughter of God, right? So to waste time on feelings of worth is actually usually a sign of ego, not humility. Even though most people think it's a sign of humility, it's not, because you're assessing, right? A person who knows himself isn't going to assess their own value, right? For better or for worse. They're going to say, I am who I am, right? Do with me, like St. Mary said, be it done unto me according to your word, right? She didn't say like, but I'm so bad. Didn't you know that I did this and this and this? Let me fix this first, right? Because if you have an attitude of, let me fix, let me change, the ego, the me is the center of it, right? So it's often a false humility when really it should be, no, I'm a daughter of Christ. So how do I become a daughter? What do daughters do? Right? Then it becomes about identity, and it becomes a more objective, factual thing rather than an emotional thing. Emotions are fine. They just can't be what direct or guide us or dictate how we go about doing something.
So, in some way, like, it feels like I'm forced to be, like, because God died for me and I didn't ask him to, it feels like, well, now it's like my turn to love him back, even though I don't feel the love inside my heart all the way through. Like, it's kind of like, like now I have to pray because he died for me, so like,
Hmm.
I have to, and I don't like the feeling of I have to.
Right, which is basically you're just being a teenager or a kid,
Okay?
right? Which is
Now I'm an
no,
adult,
I'm
so-
saying which is normal, right? Look at what happens to kids, right? A baby is born, and what do? We pamper it, right? The baby can't do anything on his or her own, so we give the baby absolutely everything that it wants or needs to the best of our abilities, right? As they start to get older, what do they think is the role of parent? Give me, right? And so it becomes more and more instilled because they're still dependent. Then they become teenagers and young adults, and what is their attitude? Entitlement, right? Where it's like, I can't believe they didn't give me this. I can't believe that they're not buying me a Lexus. I can't believe, and like as you get older, you're like, that's ridiculous, right? But like to that teenager, it's a real crisis. Like, all my friends have Lexi, right? All of my friends have this and this and this and this, and they're not letting me have blah, 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 right? They're doing something really messed up, and the parents are like, this is wrong, and they're like, yeah, see, they hate me, right? They just don't understand. It's like, they're so egocentric as a result of constantly getting, right? And so that's why a lot of times when I'm talking to, I'll just say it, it haven't happened with you guys yet, but if I'm having a family issue where like the kids or the parents are no, I'm not saying parents are flawless there. They can be very aggravating sometimes, but like often I'll ask the kid, I'm like, what do you think is the role of your parents, right? I come back to identity. Is the job of your parents to just be benefactors? Okay, are they your sponsors? Because if it's a financial thing, okay, then your parents have every right, you're 18, go get a job. If that's all you think parenting is just a financial thing, then peace out, go make your own money. But if you think that a parent has a greater role, okay, like raising you, okay, then why are you angry that they have an opinion, right? Why is that a problem to you? Are you planning to have kids one day, right? And so that's what I'm saying, bring it back to identity. So you can say all of those things of like, well, it's not my fault, which is, and I'm saying you're like a teenager. You're like, well, it's not my fault. They wanted to do this for me. Well, I didn't ask them to buy this and this for me. I wanted this. And it's like, like really? So it's fine to be in that phase, but you still need to get out of that phase, right? Which is about recovering identity, right? Is that at one point you have to recognize this train of thought is actually useless, right? Like you can have those thoughts all you want, but they're useless thoughts. Right? They're useless because it doesn't change that whether you like it or not, you are someone's daughter. Right? So God didn't say, I want you to talk to me because I died for you. He never said that. Right? He simply created and said, let's be in communion. We messed up royally, and he fixed it. Right? And so if you want to approach him because you're thankful, nice. If you want to approach him because you like him, nice. Right? But like, that's why if you look at the story of Genesis, he doesn't say, okay, Adam and Eve, gather around me, bow down, tell me how great I am. It never happened, right? It's supposed to come out of our reaction to him. Just like today, and I never thought I'd reach that day. I couldn't stand my parents growing up. I hope they don't listen to this. But today, I think my dad's a boss, right? Like, I'm aware of his flaws. He's a human being. Whereas today, a lot of the things that I complained about, I'm like, Dad did a lot of good. Right? Just stuff that I didn't see or understand or appreciate because of where I was in life at the time. Right? So get past those thoughts in terms of identity. And even if you have those thoughts, plug away anyway. Like have a good system to get into the depths of thing. Because at one point you're going to be out of that phase and you'll be in a different one. There will be another phase to replace it. Right? So one of my spiritual fathers at one point gave me, I liked it, it was good advice. It's not the same issue you were having, but the advice I think is equally applicable. I had called one time, I had like a horrible 2 weeks. And I was like, I'm down, I'm this, I'm that, these people died, this happened with there's this conflict, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And so I was trying to say but whatever, I'll make it good, I'll smile, I'll laugh. And he was like, why? Like, he was like, I'm not saying don't be happy, right? He was like, but why not be real about your present situation? Find Christ in your present situation. He's like, so you're a human being. Obviously, when a bunch of people die and all these things happen, you're going to be down, right? So he goes, here you might relate with Christ of Gethsemane, right? As opposed to relating more to Christ risen, right? As to find Christ in the situation that I am in. So you can turn your thoughts into questions to him, like, and ask him, right? Like, make that part of your prayer. So just be like, so how do I actually like you? Right? Like, right now I feel like I'm just doing it because I'm supposed to, because you did all this stuff, and I get it, that's really nice of you. But I'm not feeling this and this yet. So what do I do? And then learn how to hear him, right?
It's like friends with benefits, but like one way.
Luckily, he tolerates that.
Yeah,
But you have to work towards it. That's what I'm saying. You need a spiritual guide is to teach you, right, how to get out of that phase, right? And that's where, like, you need an individual diagnosis of, like, what is it that's going on that's creating your specific barrier, is why there's got to be a guide, right? To say, oh, it's because of 1, 2, and 3. Let's work on these. And that's why another thing you guys need to do is also read, right? Like, people don't read anymore. But if you read, like, especially the Desert Fathers are the scientists of spiritual life, right? The Desert Fathers are like, okay, this sin, here's what it's from, here's what causes it, this is what it does, this is what it affects, this is how you uproot it, right? They have, like, volumes upon volumes upon volumes of this, right? So you guys need a discipleship of people and of books and of the Bible and of Christ and of holy people. There are so many places to disciple. So if something takes a major part of your life and you don't have time for everything else, right, then you've got to do multiple things, right? We need to come back to the concept, again, I'll keep repeating it, of identity, right, of understanding who I am. I'm body, soul, and spirit, right? And I have to come back to those concepts of if I give one thing attention over another, that's going to have a problem. But one of the more practical things to do with that, and it links to what someone else mentioned, which was time management. People don't like these anymore, but a schedule. Like, having a schedule is actually really helpful. You might not always follow it 100%, but if you actually want to force a balance in your life, how do you expect to do it if you don't put in the work? Right? Like, you can't just say, oh, I want to have time management, and then anytime someone gives you a tool for it, you're like, well, I don't like that. It's like, okay, well, then you don't really want that. You're just saying that you want it. For me, my routine, like every single year, I would have my annual retreat to St. Anthony's in Egypt, and I would sit down near the end of my retreat, and I would put a general schedule, because I always went in the summers. I would write a general schedule for my upcoming school year. And I made room for knowing that some things were going to change. Where I was like, okay, if I'm going to have, like, gym in there, okay, these are going to be my gym days depending on what my early days and late days are for lectures. Okay? This is going to be what time that no matter what, I'm going to get up and pray at. Right? Where I don't make it optional anymore. Okay? These are going to be the nights that no matter what are social nights. Right? And I didn't stray from that. I almost never, except for some finals, studied on Friday nights, personally. That was always, for me, a write-off night. And I loved it, okay? But I worked it in, so I never had guilt about it, right? And I would be like, okay, these are going to be my study hours. Honest to goodness, and I'm not saying this as this make you feel good, like, talk, I had so much free time. Like, even after having a schedule, I had so much free time because I was actually getting productive, right? I found that I wasn't behind. I wasn't panicking. Not getting behind, no, that's an exaggeration. But I wasn't stressed out about things anymore, and I had time to do all the things that I wanted, and I was athletic, social, religious, academic. I was all of the above, right? And I didn't have any issues. And after, and this came as a result of my bombing that first year that we talked about, right? But after this, nobody could tell me anything, right? My mom and dad couldn't be like, oh, Zekir. There's nothing for them to yell at me about, right? Nor could Abuna, nor could anyone else, because I was already doing it. So if you want to figure out how to do it, then you need to say, first of all, what should have priority in my life, okay? And then how do I allocate the time effectively. So we get that school is your number one, right? So then you need to sit down and say, okay, school is number one. This is how many hours I have of lecture. Okay? Now, within that, how much time do I need to study? Per week or per day? Like, you need to figure that out. Okay? Exam period versus non-exam period. Figure that out. It's not that hard to do. Right? You can just sit down and time yourself one night and be like, how long does this take me? Right? If I know that in chem, every Monday I have an assignment due, right, then I can allocate, okay, then on the previous Monday or Tuesday, I'm allocating these 2 or 3 hours towards finishing the chem assignment. Right? Then I'm not stressed about chem assignment on Sunday night, so I can't say, I don't have time to pray, I'm not done my chem assignment. How am I supposed to get all this done? Right? So allocate those things. I need to pray. Go for it.
So what if you use procrastination as a tool to get your work done fast?
That's a really horrible tool. Yeah. So like we just have to be honest about what things are and aren't.
But it's effective, like you still get the A in class, you still understand the material better than most people do.
It's negatively effective because you're doing a wrong thing to get a right thing done, right? Will it work sometimes? Yes, but should you? Eventually it won't work. So let's say your parents use guilt on you. Guilt might work, it's a motivator, right? It might work on you for a period, but there's going to be a day where you rebel and say, I don't care anymore. I'm sick of your manipulations, right? The same thing is true of anything that's not real, anything that's not true. Procrastination isn't a true motivator. It's not a proper motivator. So you're using a wrong tool to get an end that you like, but it's still a wrong tool. So it can't be procrastination, right? That's why there's the parable of the person who said, eat, drink, and be merry, right? The guy who was living like today was the day, right? And he was like, ha ha, everything is good. And Christ says, you fool, this night you will give an account, right? Procrastination wasn't going to work. If he had been having a disciplined life the whole time, there wouldn't have been a fear in the day of death, right? That's what I'm saying. Be disciplined throughout, and you won't need to have procrastination as your gift, right? Like, why would you? Like, it doesn't make any sense. On a rational level, it doesn't make sense. So then you say, oh, I need prayer, right? Fix those times, right? I used to sometimes, as a student, escape between lectures, right? We use the same lecture hall for like almost the whole day. And I would sneak off into one area that I knew people walked in, and I would read my Bible there during a break, right? What was I saying to God? I value enough that I think about you throughout the day, right? Because it's not about my specific deeds, right? It's not to say, okay, I read Bible, tick, right? It's to say, why am I reading the Bible? This is what I'm trying to get from it, right? I actually love this God, or I'm trying to love this God, okay? And so if trying to love him means listening to him, right, then I'm going to go out of my way to say, well, I want to listen to you, right? When you have a friend that you've just made and you're all excited about it, and they text you, what do? You text them back, right? Right? You don't just sit there and be like, oh, whatever, right? Otherwise the person's like, oh, wow, like I thought we were going to be like friends or whatever, but I guess not. So we need to develop a schedule that will help you deal with the time management issue. It'll also help you deal with one aspect of your life taking more or less time. Because the truth is, sometimes some aspects of your life do demand more of your time. That's just a fact, right? But if I realize that I need all of the aspects, right, then I'm going to work them into the schedule. Sometimes one of the obstacles, I think, is people have a fear of change, right? This is something that I think a lot of people have issues with, where it's like, if I get disciplined, then stuff is going to change. So sometimes if it means I'm not going to play so hard anymore, right, whether it's positive play or negative play, what are my friends going to think of me, right? How are they going to look at me? Now I'm not going to be doing these things. Are they going to think that I'm judgmental? Are they going to think that I'm like goody-goody? How are they going to perceive me, right? Or on the positive side, if I am an overly serving person, are they going to think that I've like abandoned God, right? Are the kids that you like look up to me and love me and respect me going to think that I don't care about them anymore, right? And so we're fixing we're afraid to do the right thing because we've allowed a wrong thing to take place. And that's why we need to recognize that the foundation, whether the foundation was right or wrong, right? So if I'm friends with a bunch of people who all they want to do is wrong, well, I have to identify that it was wrong, right? So that if I leave it, I know why I'm leaving it. Because if I don't know why I'm leaving it, I'm going to go back to it, right? It's not going to be the only reason I go back, but it's going to be a major reason to go back if I don't even know why I left it, right? But if I know why I left it, then now I can use that to help me so that the fear of change can be combated with knowledge. Because why do people get afraid of things? Because they don't know what's coming. Really, that's all it is, right? Fear is simply like, why are people afraid of the dark? Because they can't see. Turn on the light, they can see everything. They're not afraid anymore because everything is apparent, right? So we can confront our fears with knowledge, right? Confront your fears with experience, right? So I'm afraid of this. Why am I afraid of that? Does it make sense to be afraid of that? Then what is the solution, right? I'm afraid of this change, but is that change good or bad? So we need to confront things with truth and with goals. Or like, go for it, Mina. Specifically like fear of losing friends, right? I need to ask myself, well, what is a friendship? Right? Like, is friendship simply companionship? Like, is it just physically being with other people? Because if it is, then you have nothing to fear of losing friends because you can find others. Is friendship have a goal? Okay? If it has a goal, then what is that goal? Okay? And is that goal in my best interest? Is it right for who I am in terms of my identity? Because if I'm worried about losing my friendship because all of my friends want us to just go insert negative activity here, right? Then do they have my best interests at heart? Is this working towards the goal that I want? Because if it isn't, then I have to ask, is this really a friendship? Like, and if it is it a positive one or is it a toxic one? Right? I have to identify those things. So I have to kind of come back to the crux of the matter and be a lot more objective than I'm probably used to being, right? I throw that word around a lot, objective. Because if I only deal emotionally, I'm going to get rocked. You know what you're going to say?
When you said social balance with spiritual balance, with work balance,
Mm-hmm.
just balancing your life in different ways, and you say negative friendships, with some friendships that have negative aspects of them that should probably be cut off, but you cut those friendships off, and you lose the social balance, you lose the social aspect of your life. And especially if those friendships have been like they've grown over time, and you obviously see that they're negative like light to you, like that they come negative to you because of the things they insert negative activity to your piece to it. Like, do you cut it off or do you continue with it, hoping that it'll improve over time?
That comes to the honesty factor. But first, I would say you don't lose your social balance by leaving your friends. Because I'm not saying don't be social, and I'm not saying don't have friends. I'm saying don't pursue social activities that destroy who you are. Right? So, like yesterday, I went through that whole spiel of what me and my buddies did to make a point of I still had social. Right? It was a positive social. Right? And it became a companionship social, it became a supportive social, right? That until this day, even though I'm a priest, I can still call them up if I'm in a mellow mood or in a bad mood or whatever. And it's not like, oh no, I'm a priest, I suddenly have no human aspects, right? I can still call them up and be like, yo, I just want to chill. That's all there is to it, right? So it's not saying because there's negative, therefore now have no social, lock yourself up in your room and pray. No, you'll break down because you're going to go on the other extreme, the religious right that we were talking about, right, where you're over-righteous, and of course it's going to fail. You'll last maybe a week, maybe, like if you're lucky. If you're 2 days, I'd be really impressed. So I'm not saying remove the social, period. I'm saying remove negative social, and that has to be clear. And then how do I find negative? I define negative based on my identity, right? If this is what I'm made out of, here are the things that affect it. If I'm an ant, right, I can't get close to a fire as a human can, because I'm tiny. Bring me even remotely close and I'm going to melt, right? I have to be aware of my nature, right? And so we're going to come back to that in the honesty one.
So one of the questions that we're supposed to ask to find out what is our identity?
Image and likeness of God. It is that simple. Christianity is actually stupidly simple. We talk like it's huge, but it's extremely simple. And how does the image and likeness be seen? Who is God? Right? Why did God give us a law if we're supposed to be free? The law is a ruler. It tells me what straight lines look like. Right? We talked about this at the convention. If I don't know what a straight line is, if I'm going like this, I have no idea that I'm going like this. There's nothing that shows me what a straight line is. Right? And so that was why God said, do not steal, do not covet, do not lust, do not do all these things. They were not arbitrary. Right? They were put there because that's who He is. And that's who we were designed to be. Right? So if I'm in a group that values friends with benefits, that isn't the right group for me. Okay? If I'm in a group that says like, yo bro, it's all good, do whatever makes you feel good, well, that isn't the right group for me, because it doesn't matter how I feel about it. It could still be bad for me, right? Even if I don't see it immediately, right? So that's why we have to know our identity. We have to know what we're made out of, or we won't be able to assess.
What if the fear of change isn't like social and it's more like what if this is just the wrong path for me? Like it's not a social like fear. It's like a fear of like just going like doing something that's gonna like change your life in the wrong way or like lead you to a lifestyle like God didn't want for you. Not
So-
a sinful way, just like
Yeah. Well, that's why a person needs to find out what is God's will. What is God's will for everybody? Salvation, right? That's His number one. So, especially in our tradition, I don't know why, we want God to micromanage us, and we also want free will, right? So people want God to say, I mean, this is going out of the topic a little bit, but it does help for the balance, is that we want God to be like, okay, you be a doctor, you be an engineer, you be this, you be that. That's not actually how God typically functions, right? And how do we know this? From reading the Bible, right? You'll know when you're doing something wrong by reading it and by seeing the experience of the saints, right? When God created Adam and Eve, did He say, okay, so Adam, okay, here are your chores, and Eve, here are yours? He didn't. He just said, take care of the earth, right? Cain and Abel. He was like, okay, Cain, you will farm these things. Abel, you will farm these things. He left them alone. So you don't need to worry about that, because if God has, so God's will is salvation, and anything that He wants for anybody is going to be related to the salvation of that person and the salvation of people around them. So if God has something very specific that He wants you to do, which might be a career, right? So I'm not saying God never has a specific thing for somebody. He does, okay? But when He does, you will know. You're not going to need to worry about whether or not you heard Him or not. When Joseph had doubts about marrying St. Mary, right? He was like, no, it's me. Okay, I am telling you do this, right? I will tell you, I will tell St. Mary, I will tell everybody involved, this is what I want. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, right? So we don't need to worry about that. Whereas God gave us a free will and a rational mind to say, okay, like do whatever. So there might be somebody who's got crazy good like virtue of love and compassion and joy. And so God will be like, you know what, go work wherever you want, as long as you use these virtues that I gave you, that's my will for you. My will for you is to bring people to me by using these gifts that you have, right? So you can go anywhere. There's another person who's like, no, I want you to go to med school in Ohio, okay? Because you're going to meet a group over there that are going to affect you in this way, and you're going to affect them in this way, because then I'm going to ask you, I'm going to assign you a job over there, right?
I don't know which one is your like how do you know that like okay God wants this for you or like He doesn't really care, He just wants you to use these aspects.
When there's a specific calling, He's specific in telling you, right? You do need a guide so that you're not just calling everything a sign, quote unquote, but He tends to close doors very obviously that shouldn't be closed, and open them very much, right? And so basically He wants us to do things well. For example, very obvious example, look at the disciples. When they planned Euro trip number 1, they literally just went from country to country, right? Holy Spirit steps in and says, hey, actually take a detour, go here, right? He didn't say, well, what are you guys doing going all those places, right? I want you to go here. Instead, it was like, no, cool trip. Let's make a break over here, then go do what you're doing, right? So you need a guide, but you also need to have the right mindset that God isn't going to micromanage. He actually gives us a free will.
So, if you know that change is good, and like you understand all the benefits of it, but you still are having like trouble implementing it,
Mhm.
like, so you said like setting a schedule is like one of, like a good example. What other suggestions like would you recommend?
Fear of change you're going to deal with by experience. There isn't going to be like a trick to stop it, right? It helps to be objective. It helps to know what the goal is to make me less afraid of change, right? But the only way that I'm going to be able to deal with it is dealing with it. But I need to also look at the converse, that if I never ever change anything because I never want to change, that doesn't go very well for anybody either, right? So it needs to just be a little bit rational. Fatigue, right? People getting tired. I'm going to zip through these because I know it's taking longer than I expected. I'm sorry, guys, and we can try and tie them into the Q&A. Fatigue usually means you're not setting a reasonable goal. Okay? So sometimes we need to be tired. So like you need that guide to figure out which extreme that you're on, right? But if you say like you haven't been reading the Bible ever and you're like, okay, I'm going to be reading 2 from the Old and 2 from the New every single day when you've done nothing, that's unreasonable. You haven't ever been doing that, right? If you've never prayed the Agbeya and you're like, okay, I'm going to do 3 hours of the day, that's unreasonable, right? Even if you say I'm going to do all the Psalms of 1 hour, it might be that that's unreasonable. Again, you need like the guide to kind of help you out. So set reasonable goals. Don't think that you're going to go to like glowing in the dark, right? From sinful lifestyle to glowing in the dark in a night. You're not, right? Like your past does affect you and it's not easy. Look at St. Moses the Black, right? St. Moses the Black, because he was conditioned, and this is another obstacle, is our conditioning, right, in a wrong. Moses the Black lived with like no restraint, right? He was murdering, fornicating, like raping, like you name it, Moses the Black was doing it. So did Moses the Black suddenly have no thought of doing it again when he found God? He didn't. He did not have that issue. He had that issue very strongly, right? That's why we have that story of him going 1 billion times during the night to St. Isidore, being like, the thoughts are plaguing me, the thoughts are plaguing me. And why is he running to him? Obviously because it's causing him anxiety. Obviously it's making a warfare him of saying like, why are you here? Why don't you go back and do this? Why don't you go back to the things that you were doing, right? And he's freaking out because he wants help for it. So we do have help, but your conditioning is going to affect you, and so you need to be deconditioned. Sometimes the obstacle is our parents, right? Sometimes our parents want us to do one thing over another, right? Sometimes we feel that they don't understand our culture, right? And so we take a wrong extreme because of what we perceive to be a wrong with them. And here again, I would say be objective, right? Is we don't reject something because our parents said it, right? You can't just say because this group of people, and insert any substitute for parents, right? We have to ask the question instead of what is right or what is wrong, period. Right, irrespective of the culture, because Christianity is above culture, right? Christianity is expressed in our specific cultures, okay, but it is above culture, versus cultural traditions of our ethnic background, right? So maybe our parents think guys shouldn't have long hair. Is it a sin? No, it's not, okay? Might there be a reason to or not to grow your hair? Sure, there may be, right? But there isn't a definite, clear, biblical, this is right or wrong, good Christians don't do this. Okay, that's not the case. But it's definitely not compromisable about whether or not you can have friends with benefits and say, well, my parents don't get it, everybody I know is doing this. Right? There are clear rights and there are clear wrongs, so I need to become objective about it. One of the big obstacles that I see, I lied, maybe 2 more points, is a lack of positive alternatives to things that you're doing because you've been conditioned, right? Is that if you've been doing wrong in any discipline, not just about spiritual. I'm talking about whether it's play or work or love. Sometimes you're in a toxic relationship, right? Even, for example, we know that for some reason battered women tend to seek abusive relationships, right? Like they're conditioned to it. That's the social framework that they're accustomed to, that they know how to deal with, right? So for some reason, when a wife is being beaten by her husband and she leaves him, she tends to go with other men that do the same, right? Conditioning is a big deal. So sometimes the obstacle to our finding balance is that we've been conditioned in the wrong, it's what we function in, right? If I'm used to every Friday I do this activity with these people, right? If I'm used to every time I see this person, I do this thing. If I'm used to whenever I'm in this location, this is what I do, right? It's hard at first to unlearn that. Not impossible, but it's hard, right? And so the Psalm says, depart from evil and do good. Right? It's not saying just stop the wrong, it's saying stop the wrong and put something good in its place. So you might need an outsider's help with this, okay? But you need to identify what are the things that I'm doing wrong or that are imbalanced, and say, how can I find a positive alternative, right? So like when people are like, I don't know, hookah is like all the rage. If I'm always just chilling and doing hookah, right? Well, I need to find out what is a better thing that I can do, right? That's why, again, I gave the example of my group to say, we had fun. So when someone says it's impossible to have fun, I can say, that's not true, it is, because I did it, right? We did this and this and this and this and this and this and this, right? So you need to figure out those things. So sometimes what I'll ask people to do is to come up with a list for themselves of, what are my gifts? What are my passions? What am I really good at? What do I really like? What gets me excited? Right? Am I a reader? Am I a writer? Am I a musician? Am I a baller? Okay? Am I a hockey player? Am I a social services kind of person? Am I a community service kind of person? Am I somebody that likes to take walks in nature and hike and camp? Right? Who am I? Right? So that I can say that when I have the urges to do these things, right, what can I put in it in its place that I actually like? Right? Like that I'm choosing from a list that I made that I actually like. Right? So figure out who you are. This whole identity thing is a big deal, not just in terms of image and likeness, but in terms also of your gifts and your things that you like to do, so that you can actually get somewhere. And I'm going to end with the honesty thing, because I'm sorry that this has taken so long, because really the whole thing is, as Mario said, governed by honesty. Right? Honesty with God, honesty with self, honesty with others. Why am I doing what I do? Am I being honest with what I do? If I say, oh, I'm giving this amount of time to God, are you really? And are you actively? Right? And if it's to your parents or to your friends, am I honestly doing this? And why am I doing it? Getting out of myself the real motivation of something. Right? Am I doing this because I love, or am I doing this because I want praise? These are hard things sometimes to confront about ourselves. So honesty is the rule. I usually give people, just to challenge their honesty, if, for example, it's like serving their family. So if they're, well, I don't like doing X, Y, or Z, right? Then I'll be like, okay, do what's comfortable plus one step, right? Because what does the gospel say? Someone asks you to walk for, right. Someone asks you for your garment, give it to me, don't ask for it back. Right? These are this is the gospel. So we have to live that. And the honesty is going to really be at the end of it of, am I doing what's right or wrong? Do I care about what's right or wrong? Am I actually working on this? Am I like asking those tough questions to get the help? Take for yourselves the examples, Daniel and the three youth, Joseph, right? These are helpful. This is one of the reasons I read the Bible. Like Joseph, unlike anybody here, had every right to hate God. Like really. The only thing Joseph did messed up was really taunt his brothers, like he was arrogant. But then whatever he didn't warrant being thrown in a pit and sold as a slave to a foreign country. Right? But everywhere he went and he did right, he got owned. Right? He went to Potiphar's house, he did the right thing, he got thrown in prison. In prison, he did the right thing. The people that he was supposed to get a return favor from forgot him, right? Nothing went well for him, okay? Not at the beginning anyway. So if there's anybody had the right to say, woe is me, my life sucks, honestly, it's Joseph, right? And yet he didn't. He still cared about doing right or wrong wherever he was. Did it work out for him? Pretty darn well, right? Like was it immediate? No, it wasn't, right? And did he have peace about it? Clearly he did. Did he also have anxiety about it? Probably at the beginning, right? But as you develop more and more experience, then you can chill, right? Daniel and the three youth, same thing. Foreign environment, sucky life, they stood out, right? So if you're worried about this whole standing out business, well, the three youth definitely stood out, right? Ethnically, they stood out just like you, okay? Religiously, they stood out just like you, right? And because they stood out, everybody hated them. They weren't liked for being different. There is all these plots against their lives because they didn't like that they were different, right? But because they knew who they were, they maintained their identity, and because they maintained their identity, they weren't as bothered by the things that we are that affect our balance, right? And they definitely had a balance. They were working in government positions, right? They were working in military positions. They were functional, not just functional, successful members of society, right? Of their foreign society, right? So we don't have an excuse. So know your identity, have a guide, fear nothing, discipline, right? Discipline is huge. That's its own talk. I'm not going to go there right now. But just insert discipline here, okay? And make your actions match your desire, right? This is one of the most important things. If I say that I want something, I have to do the actions that match that desire. And God was with Joseph, and he was a successful man.
Can I please get your opinion on something? Is it okay for somebody to say, this is who I am, and you have to accept me no matter what? Is this phrase right, regardless of what he or she does?
It depends on what the person means by saying you have to accept me as who I am, right? If the person's saying you have to love me, sure, right? But accepting a behavior, no. Like nobody has to, right? Because that's saying my free will overrides yours, right? Which even atheists don't believe in that, as much as they say it. If they believed in that, we wouldn't have laws, and we have laws, right? And laws are saying, you're not allowed to do this to me, we don't accept this, actually, right? So obviously the whole world believes that there are limits to our free will and how it affects other people. So if the intention is to say, you have to still love me, yeah, that's true. Like, that's true of everybody. But if it's you have to say that these behaviors are okay, or you have to tolerate these behaviors, no, that's actually not true. We don't have to. Whereas the ability of one to accept or not accept is really the measure of love, of how much am I able to deny myself for this. But I would add to that, and I'm sorry this is a longer than it should be answer, the boundaries to love are righteousness, right? So love does have a boundary, and it's righteousness, right? I can't say, I love you so much, and because of that, since you love heroin so much, I'm going to buy it for you, just to show you how much I accept you. That's not love, right? Because I'm giving you something, I'm denying myself, but for a negative end, for something that is actually wrong. So my love has to be defined by right and wrong, and that's the only limit, right? That's why God, who is love, had said that the ultimate love is to die for somebody, right? But it was still always done in truth. It was to save people, right? Instead of saying, I'll just pretend that there's no such thing as right and wrong since it makes you happy, right? So that's our motto.
So, when you do figure out the change and you implement the plan and you follow it and you feel like you're progressing, but sometimes you just hit this wall, and when you start praying and have your routine prayers, you felt that the connection's lost, and you start going downhill, and it's like a cycle, and maybe you learn something from your previous attempt, and it's like, oh, I did this wrong, and you try to fix it, but it's constantly, it's really hard to maintain that change rather than starting. Like starting the change is, I feel like it's a bit easier to actually realize a change and figure out how to do it, but to maintain it, personally, that's what I have the most difficulty with.
You guys are going to get sick of this answer. Be objective. And by that, and I'll get to it, and I know what you're saying, is our society, this era, is obsessed with shek, like with what things look like. Okay? We like everything to be glamorous, right? When you advertise a meeting, it has to be a nice poster, right? And like a cool speaker, right? Like it has to have all of these really flashy, that's what I'm looking for. Everything has to be flashy, right? And this has entered into the church, unfortunately, right? And especially I see this with the Protestants, and when I say that, I'm not taking jabs at the Protestants, I want to make that clear, but I see it creeping into us. We like to sing songs that make us emotional. And the reason why I'm saying all of that is to say that a lot of the times in our prayer life, we are looking to always be emotional. And if I'm not emotional, I think I'm not growing. And so I think that I've become stagnant because where I was all teary like at one point and so excited at one point, now I'm not, right? And so I'm like, well, what do I need to add to get more emotional, right? I won't identify that I'm trying to be more emotional because I associate emotional with love, right? And so I'm actually working towards a wrong goal without even realizing it, right? So for example, a married couple, do they have butterflies in their stomach every time they see each other for like their whole married life? They don't, right? Let's say, to reverse my sexism from the nurse practitioners yesterday, let's say the husband has been at home in the kitchen and the wife has been at the hospital on call for 3 days in a row and worked like 3 graveyard shifts and 18-hour days and comes home and is exhausted. Okay, imagine if the guy comes and he's like, and he's so excited that his wife is finally home and he just wants to talk and talk and talk about what he's done in the last 2 days, and the wife is like, wants to put her feet up and just doesn't feel like listening. Okay? If she is listening but not interactive, is this a sign of her not loving? No. She's exhausted. Right? So is it more sacrificial that she'll try and force herself to have a conversation? Sure. But it's not a lack of love, right, of the state she's in. So the reason I'm saying is that you're going to go through phases in your spiritual life. Okay? And so what we need to do is get good guidance in each phase to find out, is something actually wrong or is it a perceived wrong? What is my objective and why is it a right objective? Because is my objective simply to be more emotional? When as family members, we're not always super pumped every time we see each other. I'm not like crazy excited every time I see my brother. I am when I haven't seen him in a long time, right? But if we're with each other like daily, I couldn't care less, like sorry, right? But does it mean I don't love him? No, it doesn't. Because we show our love in our commitment to one another, in our sacrifices for one another, and making our lives about one another, right? And so if my whole being is about God, it's okay that I'm not hyper-emotional in all of my prayers, right? But at the same time, say, also have a good guide to diagnose, right? Is it that you're not growing? Is it that you're just seeking a certain thing and you're ignoring a whole bunch? Or is it that God is teaching you something, right? Abu Method Maskeen wrote something once about monks who had a crazy, amazing spiritual life and who suddenly have like nothing, right? And he was saying that in some specific situations, it's because a monk has started to think that their spiritual life and growth is because of these rules that they were following, instead of it being a response of love, right? So like that monk will go back and like, you know what, I'm going to do the same rule I did when I entered the monastery, right? Because that was working. So they go back and they find they can either barely do it or they're doing it and they don't feel anything. So I'm saying you need a good guide to be like, okay, is it a lesson from God? Is it something you're doing? Is it something you're not doing? Right? Is it the mindset? All of those can be diagnosed, but just be very careful that you don't get trapped into thinking that a certain result is the right one when it might not be. Right? It's just, again, it's like the gym. Right? Is that you can't get a 6-pack, right? If you don't have a right diet, low fat, right? Also do resistance and also do some cardio, right? If you only do one and not the other two, you won't. So you need somebody to find out, like, is it missing ingredients or what it is? Like, you get the point. Like, it needs to be the whole picture.
So a lack of emotion in the process of change is not necessarily a sign of, like, going backwards.
No. It could be a sign of being stagnant, and it could lead to going backwards, but it's not necessarily one, right? So that's why like we need to look for newness in our religious life, and we have to look at the different ways that there are, right? Not just in terms of like emotionally, right? I still get excited about certain things when I'm talking to God, but it's about incorporating everything in my being, right? It might come through reading too, where I discover something new about God, right? It might be my Bible, it might be a spiritual reading, right? It might be something I never noticed in the Psalms before. It might be an interaction I had with other human beings, of being like, today I saw this, right? Because then you'll start to hear his responses to you. It's not going to be a one-way dialogue.
But God allows those times, right? God allows you to have like these moments of chasing the high, for example, when you're with God, right? Because if you're trying so hard over and over again, week after week, month after month, and you're still like in the same mundane thing, then like why would God do that to us? Why would He allow us? Like why would you be in a relationship with somebody who barely makes you feel like you're at all like happy? So I feel like if we strive enough, right, that God would allow us the moments of like high intensity, like high good emotion.
Well, your whole thing you're saying has a presumption that God is doing it to somebody, right? So will God outreach us? Sure, He will, but that doesn't negate that I might be doing something completely wrong, right? So like, let's say I'm not a social being, like personally, okay? If somebody, and I hate texting, and if somebody decides that the only way to have a relationship with me is to text me non-stop, we're not going to click, right? And they can say, look how bad that person is. Look at AP, he doesn't text. You're wanting me to be somebody that I'm not. Or if I'm not athletic and you want to bond with me only over basketball, which I suck at, right? We're not going to bond there. So I have to approach God as who He is, not who I want Him to be, right? This is a major obstacle to most people, is that most people want God to fit into their little box. And like, no, my Jesus is so cool, and He's so cute, and He's a teddy bear, and He does blah, 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 blah. So like, okay, that's your Jesus, right? Is it an idol, or is it Him, right? So yes, God might outreach us, okay, and He does respond to people's effort. I'm not going to say that He doesn't, but I can't use that and say God did this to me if my whole approach is wrong, right? Because God is a real being with a real personality, and He manifested Himself towards us. Right? So another person can be like, well, I want to get to know God and love through my fornication. And say, no, I love this woman while I'm with her. I love this guy while I'm with him. And God will be like, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. Can you say, well, why would God do this? I was actually using this to get to know you. And it's like, but this is wrong. Right? This is against your being. So just be careful with that. Yes, God will outreach, but I can't just say that without identifying whether I'm doing it right or wrong myself.
I feel like still, God is so big that we can reach Him through many ways. I mean, it's not only through a prayer or anything, but we can, I mean, for me, for example, if I praise or if I like draw or something, that's how like, I think God, I personally reach God, but I don't know if that's, I'm creating a little idol or something.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So I'm agreeing that there are many ways. That's why I was saying there are so many, right? But I have to still care about right and wrong, and I still have to care about not just my identity, but His identity, right? So that I'm doing it the right way, right? St. Paul said, whether I eat or drink, let it be for the Lord, right? So I can use any of my gifts and my identity for Christ, right? And we should, right? And in fact, if you do, you're going to have the most joy. Right? I'm a music person too. I love music, and I can sing for hours in the car and scream and yell, and I'll have the time of my life, right? But not everybody is. So this might be my way of praising. I'll write songs for myself, okay? Another person is art. Another person, it might actually be sports, right? Another person, it might be in nature. There's so many ways to do it. This is correct. All I'm saying is we still have to care that I'm not just imposing my view of the world or my view of God on the world and on God. I still need to step back and say, who is God, right? And what is the objective of everything? No worries. Are we doing the questions now, or? If all my friends are from church and we all go together to do ungodly things, what are some steps to help us start doing positive things together? That's a good question. I wrote a blog about that one. It's called I Don't Want to Be That Guy. Someone has to start being that guy. or that gap. So it takes an honest conversation, and it's uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable because you're confronting a wrong, right? So I'm not going to pretend that it's going to go so well. I'm going to be like, thank you so much for like telling us what's true, right? You're usually going to be like, "Hey, and like that kind of response. So I get it, right? But we have to be honest about what, again, our identities are and what our objectives are, right? So if you're a church group, a Christian group, then you can say to the group, yo, I get that we've been doing this, and I get that we've been enjoying this, and that we're having fun, and I know that we all like each other. So this isn't a question of whether we like each other or not. But is what we're doing actually right? Right? That's if you have the fortitude to do that, then great. Right? And then it can be like yes or no. Then be like, okay, if we're identifying that it's wrong, then why don't we change it? Right? And demand real answers. Right? It's funny because secular people are more willing to do that sometimes than Christians are, right? Where they'll be very selective about their friends and like, no, I had to cut them off, it's bad for me, right? Or they'll confront people, and I've seen it, I worked, right? Whereas for us, it's like, and all this like lame sauce. So, confront. If the group is not willing to, as a group, fix it, okay, then I would suggest the next step would be to say, okay, you might not be concerned with this, okay? And I'm not here to tell you that you have to change yourself for me, right? I do think that if we're actually friends, I should be able to say something's bad for you. Because if you saw your friend about to like fall into like a canyon, I would hope that you're not going to be like, it's his free will and it's his right to fall into a canyon. Right? I would hope that you'd be like, no, he's about to die, I'm going to yell and scream and run at him. If he chooses to run off, I'll be sad, I'll be devastated, and I'll be broken, but I can't stop them, right? But I should yell. If I actually care about people, I'm going to yell, okay? If you don't care, stay silent, right? But it depends on, so you have to ask yourself, do I believe in this? Yes or no? Why or why not? And am I just being emotional? If I know that this is wrong, then what am I doing about it? Do I care, right? Because there are so many places it can go wrong. If the group isn't willing to accept it as a group thing, I was saying, all right, well then, how receptive would you be to just saying, well, regardless of what your choices are, I'm not sitting here to be judgmental of you, etc., I don't want to do this anymore. Okay? Are you at least able to accommodate me when I'm here that we don't do that? And if they say no, they're not your friends. Just because they're from the church doesn't mean that they're good friends. Because if they say, no, if you want to be part of this group, you have to do what I'm doing, then they're doing exactly what you were afraid of. Saying that I don't want them to feel they have to do it my way. But they're doing it to you, right? So again, be objective, right? So I would suggest saying the group aspect first. If it doesn't work, try the individual aspect, right? If that's not working, then you need to divorce yourself. Right? If they come at you and be like, oh, he's so righteous now, or she does this now, be like, no, it's not. Like it's not that I think that I'm better than you. I have my own struggles, but I also don't want to actively pursue something that I know isn't going to work out for me. So I'm not talking about you. I'm not saying, oh, look at those bad people. And if you are doing that, then you need to stop. I'm not saying look at those bad people who did blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying I have decided I don't want to do that anymore. Right? If a person who quit smoking spends their life being like, oh, look at those horrible, stupid smokers, right? They're going to be seen as arrogant, like nose in the air people. It's different from someone saying, yeah, there are people who smoke, I just don't anymore. That's all that there is to it. So find a positive alternative so that it's not just lecture, right? If you say, okay, well, instead of going to the hookah bar, why don't we go to Newport and just chill at the beach, right? Without like the weed or the hookah, okay? If we have another, like we would take random night trips to Niagara Falls, and we're so sick of Niagara Falls in Canada. It was just fun because we went together, right? So it's like, okay, night drive, just go on a night drive. If I need to do something wrong to have fun, it means that I'm trying to escape reality, right? It means like I said, the whole people like glamorous things, right? People like bling. Right? It means that I can't like something normal. I can only like it when it's given a new face. And if that's the state that you're in, you're going to have a really crummy life. And I'm not saying that to be a jerk. You will have a crummy life. Why? Because you're looking for a fake life. Because real life doesn't have all those frills on it. So if I can only like it when I dress it up, I'm never going to be content, because you can always dress it up in a new way, right? Because trends come and go. Today, hookah's cool. Tomorrow, it's going to be something else, right? There's going to be something new. It's not going to go away, right? So I have to come back to the intrinsic value of something and what it is. But try and find something positive to suggest so that you're not just lecturing, right? Be like, how about we do this, for example, right? And don't be afraid, and convince your friends of what their definitions are of lame, right? Our group in Canada, we could sit in a parking lot for 4 hours and have the time of our lives, right? I still love Laser Quest or laser tag, right? Kids game, but it's stupidly fun, right? We're all children at heart. What's the problem with running around and getting out our energy in something like that? So I'm not saying these are your activity lists, laser tag and bowling. I'm just saying that, don't be afraid to do something quote unquote lame. The idea is that if I'm doing it together with people that I like, it's going to be enjoyable because it's with people that I like, right? Why do you think a couple, especially when they're first getting to know each other, can spend hours talking about nothing, right? And have so much fun. And they're not doing anything. They're just talking or texting or thinking about it it's irritating to the rest of the world, right? Because they're getting to know each other as who they are. Not with the frills, right? Who they are, and they're liking it, right? So you need to be able to like each other and enjoy your time with one another without the frills. Does that answer it, or are there follow-up questions on that?
And then I just want to add, you do these things within the balance in life.
Yes.
Not too much of having you feel time for 4 or 5 hours, even if they're not doing anything wrong, but it's still gonna
right.
shift this balance that you were talking about.
There does have to be a balance. Obviously, there's going to be some push and pull about how much is too much, how little is too little, and all of that. But the concept of balance, of course, has to be there, right? And the group will find that. One of the reasons I think why groups do wrong together is because they spend too much time with each other, and so they don't know what to do anymore, right? We had a lounge for our high school kids when I was a high school servant in Canada, and when we first started it, it was off the hook. Everybody was there every single week. And it was I think it was more fun for me as a servant maybe than it even was for the high schoolers. It was so much fun. Suddenly, 2 years in, everyone stopped coming. And I was why did you guys stop? It was actually fun. It's not like we had to trick you into coming. You guys were coming, bring your friends. And oh, because we got cars, right? Because when they got cars, they're now we can see each other every day. So it's not a thing anymore to meet up on Friday, because I can see everybody whenever I want, right? And so over familiarity, because again, balance is a thing, right? Over familiarity is actually a problem, right? Sometimes we don't realize that. Is that if I no longer have any proper boundaries, right, and we do everything all the time together, we become a little bit dysfunctional as a group. And because of that, we're looking for new ways to entertain ourselves. And then we start taking a new twist to things. What is God actually like, and can people have different perspectives of Him? People can have different perspectives of Him, but they can also be wrong about those perspectives, right? And so we look at God as He revealed Himself. This is why in Orthodox theology, we have sometimes what is called I don't want to use the word negative because we actually have a very positive theology. But we will define God sometimes by who He is not, or by who He is, right? So we believe in one God, God the Father, so we're defining who He is. Creator of heaven and earth, He's a creator, right? We look at His only begotten Son, who did this, right? The Old Testament Jews, when they would talk about God, they call Him Jehovah, and then insert adjective here, right? Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Adonai, right? Jehovah El Shaddai, right? They had different names based on what they experienced from God, what they saw from Him. So we can have different perspectives, but we need to be aware that it's not just a matter of opinion. God revealed Himself, right? So I have to define my opinion based on how He revealed Himself and not just opinion. So I can't be well, I think God's going to be okay with that. That may or may not be true, right? I need to hold it against some kind of standard.
Sorry to if I may really quickly. Something comes to my mind when you're saying that Christ, when the Bible says Christ is the express image of God. So it reminds me of what you're talking about. Sometimes we can get lost and think of God so distant and far when we look at the image of Christ and who He is through the Scripture, through the church, and that's who Christ is. I think that's the correct perspective of God.
Right. So some people will just go a little outside of the box to apply, right? And that's why earlier, like discipleship and reading, right? Because if you're just arbitrarily deciding what you think God would or wouldn't do, you need to ask, am I being objective? Like, where did I get this from? How to find acceptance to God's will. It depends on whether you believe that God loves you or not, right? Like, think of a little kid who might ask for something really dumb. Imagine if an 8-year-old, I use this at the convention, an 8-year-old wants to drive. Is driving wrong? Or does it make sense to allow an 8-year-old to drive? No, right? So when the parent says to the kid, don't do that, is the kid going to be happy? Of course not, right? Is it what motivating the parent selfishness? It's not, it's love, right? And it's concern for the person. So we need to realize that we are all that little kid, right? Like when it comes to God, we are all that little kid. So we often think we know what we're doing. We often think that what I've planned out to be the best thing is the best thing. And often it isn't, right? So God isn't going to actually force you to do His will, right? So if you recognize that, then you'll realize even how more loving He is than we are. Because we tend to impose ourselves on others, right? Whereas God doesn't even do that. He's like, no, I'm telling you right from wrong. I'm telling you, I designed you, so I know that this is not a good idea. It's up to you, right? So if I can have in my mind that there's a creator who actually loves me and who does all these things, it's easier for me to accept His will. And when you've actually done that once, you'll find it very easy to do after. When I was going for my first job and graduating from pharmacy, I was like the guy that many of my colleagues were like, oh, he's going to be a prof, he's going to be a crazy, amazing clinical pharmacist, he's going to be blah, blah, blah. And I liked that. I liked being seen as smart because I have an ego. And so when I came to apply for jobs, I got an offer for this amazing like clinical position that I would have thought somebody with 5 years of experience would have got. And I told the guy, I'm like, you know what, like, I might do a doctorate next year, so if I come, you might only get 8 months out of me before the program starts. So I just want you to know that before you actually hire me, because I don't want to kind of make you upset with me afterwards. He's like, yeah, probably it'll be a yes, but give me like a week or two to get back to you. He didn't get back to me for like a month, like there was nothing. But to all of these things, and so I was like, you know what, I should broaden my horizons and ask like really God's will, because I was narrowing him to 2 jobs, and I was like, this or this. Right, which is not asking God's will. I'm saying altar ballot. I want Jesus to be my 8 ball, right? So I was like, okay, no, I'm going to apply to everything. I applied to so many things, and there's a major shortage of pharmacists at the time. So it's not like it was a rough time for pharmacists. I was getting like radio silence, like absolutely nothing. I'm like, wow, apparently I'm an idiot, okay, and I'm not as smart as I thought. And then the one company that I'm like, Lord, please no, like please no, was the only one that like called me up, and it was Walmart. And I'm like, for real, God? Like, really? Like, Walmart? And I went to the interview, and I'm like, I was angry. Like, I'm like, And I'm like, I want this and this and this and this. And I left, and I'm like, this is like, wow, I'm going to be at Walmart. And I'm like, they look like garages. And at the time, Walmart was like, I had actually never stepped into Walmart in my life. But Walmart was the most... like the least rated professional satisfaction for pharmacists at the time. I'm like, God, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm like, please God, at least don't let me work with an Egyptian. It ended up being, I won't tell how I discern God's will, that's its own maybe will of God lecture. God said this one, okay, when, an Egyptian, okay. Right after I accepted, the floodgates opened of all the people that I had applied to, and it had been like 3 weeks, and usually like it was faster when they're like, we want you, please come, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it's too late, I'm at Walmart, right? But what happened at Walmart? I wanted to move up north, right? My parents weren't so thrilled about that. Walmart was like, we're gonna pay you extra money to go up north. They thought I was doing them a favor, right? They're like, we want you to go up north, please, for like 3 months a year, and you're gonna get a premium, and we're gonna give you this, and we're gonna pay for blah, 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 right? I always went to Egypt. A big part of my life was my retreats to St. Anthony's Monastery in Egypt. I'd go for at least a month or more every single year. I suddenly was able to do that without any question. I don't know any of my friends that are able to do that, right? I had a schedule from heaven. Every like 3 weeks I had a long weekend. I was traveling all over Canada. I was serving, and I'm like, I've got the best package ever, right? And I was serving, I was getting retreats, I was getting paid like an obscene amount of money, right? By the time that I left for the monastery, I was making money that I don't know any pharmacists make. I didn't think it was possible for pharmacists to make that much without even owning a pharmacy, right? But he knew which one was good for me, even though I despised one. And by the time I left, Walmart at the time, I don't know what it is now, but when I left Canada, was the #1 desirable place for pharmacists in Canada. And it went from garage style to a huge emphasis on clinical, right? So having gone through that experience, right, now when God is saying, I want you to do this, I'm not as reactive, right? I'm not like, oh, seriously? Like, I'm like, all right, here we go again. You know my opinion. But if this is what you're saying, I now trust you. So as you develop more experience, you'll be less worked up about the different things that he has as his will. How can you really love someone you don't like? Very easily. Love is self-denial. You don't have to like the person. Okay? So love is saying that I'm going to put the person before me. I don't have to like them to do that. Right? I don't have to, if I like have extra money in my pocket and I give money to a beggar, do I like the beggar? If I said I did, I'd be lying. I don't know them. I have no idea if I like them. Right? But yet I'm sacrificing something. I'm denying myself, my riches for somebody else. So love is, if you realize that love is just self-denial, then it's not too difficult to do without liking somebody. Yeah.
If you'd like, you can hang on to the questions.
Sounds
the rest,
good.
if you'd like, and then God willing, if it's okay, we can also have another session later. We'd love that.
That sounds good.
And we're really drilling you today. May God give you strength and forgive us.
Sounds
We're
good.
waiting.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Word life. Please.